Hello, I'm Alex and this is my second video assignment for online equine nutrition. What I'm going to be doing in this video is I'm going to be evaluating a pasture, and I'm going to be doing this in a couple of different ways. First, I'm going to be evaluating the sward height of the pasture, and I'm going to get into specifics later on in the video, but I'm going to be taking about 25 different points on the pasture and averaging their heights in order to get really the overall height of the pasture. And then also in the video, I'm going to be doing a step point evaluation. So I'm going to be going to various different points on the field, about 25, and I'm actually going to be seeing what is actually at those 25 points to try to get an overall representation of really the vegetation on that pasture. Now the pasture that I'm going to be evaluating actually is on a private property, and it used to be used actually for horses. There's no fencing anymore, and this is actually a field that is supposed to be reincorporated into the farm to have horses. So I'm a little bit excited to do this because this will be a very good starting point for what needs to be done on that field in order to make it conducive to having horses graze. So in this part of the video, I'm going to be measuring the grass in the field to make sure that it's going to be a proper height in order for horses to start grazing on it. So all that we do just for measuring the height is really just that. So for here, say for this little bunch here, I would just put this down, and for this it would be about 11 inches. So right there would be 11 inches, and I'm gonna get 25 points throughout the field in a zigzag pattern to try to get a good representation of the height for multiple samples. So for another example of a measurement would be about right here, and this would be, right here would be about 16 inches. And then going a little bit further, about here, this would only be about 10 inches. So in this part of the video, what I'm going to be doing is doing step point in order to evaluate the vegetative coverage of the field. And what that is going to consist of is me doing a zigzag pattern and finding different points in the field in order to take in order to get an idea of what grass is there, if it's bare ground, grass, weed, or anything else. So what we're going to be doing, and if you can see by my foot here, I'll go over, I guess I can do it right here. So what I'm going to be doing is just trying to find, at about a 45-degree angle with a pin, going down and seeing what the first thing that the pin touches, and that was going to be this weed right here. So that would be 1 point. I'm going to do 25 of these points, and after that I'm going to get a percentage of how much is grass, how much is weed, how much is bare ground, and then that's going to help determine how much grass is really in the field and get us a quantitative evaluation of that. So for a couple more measurements of step point, another one would be right here going down. And it looks like I hit some wild onion, so that would go down as a weed and wild onion, and I'm going to be writing all of these down on a piece of paper. And then doing another zigzag pattern. Say to about here. Going down. And the first thing I hit was orchard grass, tall fescue. So now that I have my measurements for the sward height, I wrote them all down on a piece of paper, so now I can calculate the average for the entire field of all the samples that I got. So over here you can see, these are all of my samples. I did do 25 of them. You can see that the grass is actually pretty tall. Just looking at these numbers alone, you can guess that it's going to be somewhere around 10. There's 10, there's 13, there's even 15 in there. And again, I got 25 samples. There were some areas where it was only 2 or 3 inches. But overall, for the average, you have the sum of the heights, and then you also have the number of samples, and that got me to 9.73 inches. So 9.73 inches, that is a little bit tall. You do want it to be anywhere from 6 to 8 inches. Anywhere above 10 is when you need to really start mowing and making sure that it's not going to get any higher than that. But overall, 9.73 inches, this would be a perfectly fine point for horses to be grazing on that pasture, whether you're doing rotational, whether you're letting them out for in the spring, the first of the season. This would not be a bad height. Probably it would be better to have it a little bit lower, but you also don't want the pasture to be too lush because you don't want to cause any type of, gastric upset. Now for the step point, I have those results as well. I wrote them down. I actually took 40 samples for the step point. It did take me a little while. I couldn't imagine doing 100, but I did 40, and I also wrote down not only if it was grass or weed, but I also wrote down the type of grass and the type of weed, which I thought it was. I'm not, an expert in pasture plants, but this is the best I could do. So for grass, let me see if I can put this up here and you can see it. So for grass, TEF is tall fescue. There was also orchard grass, creeping bent grass. This is just, I put a 0 where I couldn't identify it, or I wasn't able to try to identify it. There was also wild onion, dandelion, and then the X just represents bare ground. So for the grass, there was tall fescue, orchard grass, creeping bent grass. Some I wasn't able to identify. There was it was mainly tall fescue and orchard grass. There was a lot of creeping bent grass, but those really kind of were just in beds alone and kind of isolated. But these were just kind of throughout the tall fescue and the orchard grass from what I was able to see. Now for the weeds, there was an okay amount of wild onion, some weeds that I couldn't identify, and then also dandelion. And there was one spot I found bare ground out of the 40 samples, and for the other, there were some sticks and then also some leaves. Now, going through all of those, I was able to get a percentage of vegetative coverage of about 97.5%. So that's actually very good. I have to say that honestly, these fields were for pasture at one point. I don't know how long ago, and I don't know when they stopped being used for horse pasture, but they actually seem to be in very good shape. There were some areas that were better than others, and there are multiple fields there, and I did pick the best field. There were about 3 or 4 fields, and that was the best field I could find. So I was a little bit more interested in focusing on that field because that is where this farm would be starting to reincorporate that land into grazing land for the horses. So again, some sticks and leaves, some weeds, but mainly grass. It was about 80% of it was grass. And the weeds was about 12.5%, bare ground only 2.5%. Again, out of the 40 samples, I only struck bare ground one time, and so overall, this was very good. This is a land that would be very good for horses to begin grazing on again. Again, the only thing is maybe it's a little too tall, not too tall, but those plants are going to be pretty lignified, so maybe having it a little bit younger or starting it a little bit earlier in the season, depending on how you think the horses are going to react to it. And overall, I would recommend that this would be pretty good to start grazing on. Just putting up some fencing would be a little bit necessary. So that's mainly where I stand on this pasture. So the next portion of the video, I'm going to be identifying 3 different grasses as well as 1 weed. So the first grass I'd like to identify is, I believe it to be a creeping bent grass. It is very soft and plush, and I actually picked one of the leaves, and the leaves do alternate up the stem. And it's very soft and plush and kind of creates a mat on the soil. So the second grass I'd like to try to identify is what I believe to be orchard grass. This is it right here. So I picked a little bit of it. It does have very long leaves, and the leaves are in a V shape. It does have a very flat stem, and it's not too much of a bluish color, but I do believe this to be orchard grass. So the last grass I'd like to try to identify is what I believe to be tall fescue. And this is it right here. You can see the leaves are very tall and they're very flat. They do have kind of a shiny tint. The stem, I actually picked some of it. The stem is very round. It is not flat like orchard grass. And there you can see the leaves. And the leaves actually, they are coarse when you run your fingers in the other direction. So, and they do have ridges. So that does lead me to believe that this is tall fescue. Also, this one has a very good ligule, if I can get it to, and get you to see it. There is a very prominent ligule right there. Kind of that hairy little thing, that little white thing sticking out. So the weed I'd like to identify is actually wild onion. And you can see it's very characteristic. It is very tall. It has almost like a bluish, very dark green color to it. One of the characteristic ways of seeing if it is wild onion is looking for the bulbs. And so this does have bulbs, and onion can cause, just like garlic, Heinz body anemia if a horse eats enough of it. So it would be beneficial to remove this from the field. So this includes my second video assignment of pasture evaluation. I hope you enjoyed it.